In my last video, I took a close look at the 2019 Memphis team to try to get a good understanding of what Mike Norvell wants to do when his passing game is at its best. So far, he's been unable to replicate that success at Florida State. And my colleagues over at Knowles247, Coach Adam Brown and Brendan Sonnone have taken their respective shots to try to figure out why. And now it's my turn. So let's go ahead and jump into some film and try to tease out some answers. The first and most obvious reason Florida State is struggling in the passing game is down to wide receiver, and Brendan Sonnone's already written an excellent article detailing all of the ways that they're statistically struggling. However, I think it only takes one clip to really see it in action. If you've been around my channel for long, you've probably seen me talk about this exact play before. In my last video, I talked about how Mike Norvell loves isolation passing plays, and this is one of his go-to concepts. It's called slot fade. And these outside receivers are going to run hitches, just trying to occupy their guy. That way they can isolate the speedy slot receiver one-on-one in space against a safety, who's generally not one of the defense's best coverage guys. Jacksonville State is in man coverage here on third down, which means FSU is getting the exact look they want. Theoretically, this should be a big play. However, what happens is the receiver gets ran out to the sideline, and there's very little room for this ball to be thrown. Here's another clip of slot fade in the same game. Here instead of man, Jacksonville State's playing zone. And they're in cover 3, which means that there should be a natural gap down the seam where this wide receiver is running. However, a very similar thing happens, where this safety, who shouldn't be able to keep up with him, does a good job of closing this window and making it a hard completion. Let's compare this to a play that we saw last time. Here Navy's in the same defense that Jacksonville State was, and Navy's actually a much better defense than Jacksonville State is. However, this time you see the slot receiver on this safety able to win out in space, and there's a big window here. In his 4 years at Memphis, Mike Norvell always had a true number 1 wide receiver, as shown in this graph, which shows the difference in yardage between the number 1 receiver on the team and the number 2 receiver on the team. At Florida State, he hasn't had that guy, which means that he hasn't had anybody to consistently rely on winning these isolation concepts. But I think there's actually another problem at play, and that's that he continued to call these concepts even when they weren't working. Here we are late in the 4th quarter in that same Jacksonville State game, and Florida State's still trying to force slot fade down the defense's throat. Here it's the same receiver too against the safety in man coverage, and again he's unable to get separation and win downfield. They continued trying to hit these big shot isolation plays throughout the whole season. Here they are in the last game against Florida. This unbalanced diamond set is bringing most of Florida's defenders to this side of the field, basically giving them an isolation here at the top. And they're just going to run a fade here, hoping their man can just win in this one-on-one scenario. Unfortunately, like clockwork, he doesn't. This is shown by the stats as well. If we go back to that graph that showed how Mike Norvell likes to break down his passing game, we can see that he became increasingly one-dimensional when he got to Florida State. You see the intermediate and short passing games dipping in the past 2 years as he became increasingly reliant on only long passes and screen passes. This is particularly unfortunate because Jordan Travis is rated as a 90th percentile passer in both the short and intermediate passing game. That dramatically drops off when it comes to the long passing game, where he's closer to a 50th percentile passer. This insistence on the long passing game also puts extra pressure on FSU's offensive line. Coach AB already wrote an excellent article detailing all of the ways that Florida State's offensive line has hampered the passing game. But I want to take a second and talk about how FSU's passing game might be hampering the success of the offensive line. FSU's offensive line was 104th in pressure rate last year, which is absolutely abysmal. But I think a more telling stat is that they were 78th in time to pressure. That means they were just below average in giving their quarterback time to throw the football. It's just that FSU held on to the football for so long. In these clips that I'm showing, you can see that these receivers are all releasing downfield, which means they're long developing plays, meaning that your offensive line, which already struggles, is now having to block for longer. Now this doesn't take FSU's offensive line off the hook. They're still below average, and that's something that still needs to improve. One thing I haven't talked about in terms of FSU's struggling passing game might be the first one to pop to many of y'all's minds, and that's the quarterback Jordan Travis. And that's because most metrics grade him out as an above average passing quarterback, and PFF, which does the best job of factoring in wide receiver play, grades him out as the 26th best passer in the country. Now I'm sure people disagree with me, so if you want to hear more people talk about why he isn't a good quarterback, I would probably go to the comments below. But to me, I don't think he's the reason why this team is struggling right now. What seems to be the biggest problem from my perspective is that you're lacking top-end talent from the wide receiver and offensive line positions. And frankly, I don't think the play calling put the players in the best position to succeed last year in the passing game. However, I do have to note my bias. I am an air raid guy at heart, so I prefer passing plays that slowly and methodically move the ball downfield in small chunks. And it is worth noting that they did win these routes a couple of times to get them some big plays in key moments. But I think a little bit of extra patience might serve the passing game well. For instance, let's look at this play against the best defense Florida State played all season in Clemson. Florida State has this receiver isolated one-on-one on this corner. Clemson's in man coverage, and you can see that they are not respecting the deep ball at all. There's basically 10 guys in the box here. FSU knows that it would be futile to try to win a pure one-on-one matchup, so Florida State has to get creative in trying to spring a wide receiver open. They go to a tried and true air raid play called mesh. In mesh, wide receivers run intersecting crossing routes over the middle of the field, setting pseudo picks and giving them slight advantages so they don't have to just win purely on talent out in space. You can see it's pretty effective here. This receiver running inside sets a pick on this linebacker who's supposed to be following this running back. This means this running back is wide open and sets up the biggest play of the game. It'll be interesting to see whether Alex Atkins stepping up as offensive coordinator changes the passing philosophy at all, because I'm afraid that if it doesn't, and there's not a serious influx of talent at the wide receiver position, this passing game may never get off the ground. Thanks for watching. Next time, me, Brendan, and AB are planning on getting together to debate the potential future of this passing game. So join us on Knowles247's YouTube channel.